Jack and the Beanstalk. Once upon a time, there was a little boy, and his name was Jack. And he lived with his mother, and they lived together in a little house at the edge of the forest. And they didn't have much money or much things around at all. But they did have a, what was it they had? Oh, they had a few chickens and a few things like that. But they did have a pig. And finally, they ran out of money. She had no money left, and she said to Jack, she said, his name was Jack. That was where the name Jack and the Beanstalk came. He was Jack, and you'll hear about the Beanstalk later. So anyhow, his name was Jack. So she said to Jack, she said, Jack, we don't have any money left, and we have no food to eat, but we do have the pig. Now, I want you to take that pig and take it down to market, and you exchange that pig for some food so that we'll have something to eat. And she said, now, Jack, she said, don't be silly. She said, you just go down and trade. And she said, make a good trade. Get as much food as you can because that's all we've got left. So Jack said, never fear, Mother, never fear. And so off he went down, got the pig, and he was starting to go down to the market. As he was going through the path in the woods there, up came a funny-looking little person. He didn't look like the troll, or he didn't look like Rumpelstiltskin, but he was a queer-looking egg. He was one of the local yokels or something like that, but he was a queer little guy. He came up and he said, hey, Jack. You are Jack, aren't you? And he says, yeah, sure, I'm Jack. Why? He said, I want to talk to you. He said, what do you mean you want to talk to me? He said, well, he said, that creature that you got there that you're leading, he said, what is that? Oh, he says, Jack says, you know what that is. He says, that's a pig, a porker, a hog. Well, he says, I know, but what are you going to do with it? Well, he says, I'm going to take it down to the market house and I'm going to trade it for some food down at the market. And this old fellow, he wanted that pig. And he says, you know, Jack, he said, I'm something special. You don't really know who I am. He said, but I'm going to give you the chance of a lifetime. He says, I've got something to trade to you for that pig that you'll never be sorry about. And Jack says, well, what's that? He says, well, now don't laugh. He says, but here. And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out, he says, opened up his hand, and Jack looked and he says, well, that's nothing but a bunch of silly beans. Oh, he says, don't you call those silly beans. Those are magic beans. And Jack says, what do you mean they're magic beans? He says, all I can tell you is that you take those beans and when you get home, you plant them and you won't believe what you see. So Jack said, oh, that sounds good to me. So the little man went ahead and he took the pig and he went off in the woods, and Jack took the handful of beans and he came back home, whistling and jumping up and down. He came in the house. Oh, Mother, he said, she said, yes, Jack. She said, what did you get? She says, where's the food? He says, well, I met this little man and he traded me some magic beans. Magic beans? So Jack, you silly, silly boy, why did you trade away our last possession for a bunch of silly beans? She says, give me those beans. And so he gave them to her and she took them. She went to the window, she opened them and she threw them outside. She said, that's for your beans. She said, now what are we going to do? We have nothing even to eat anymore. She says, oh, Jack, why were you such a foolish boy? She says, go to bed. I don't even want to see you anymore. So Jack went to bed and he fell asleep. And he woke up in the morning. When he came downstairs, the sun was shining. He could see the sun shining. But over their house was all shady. And so he went out and he looked. And right there where she had thrown those beans out, here was a great big tree, a bean tree. Did you ever hear of a bean tree? Well, this was a bean tree. I don't know, it was string bean, green bean, black. Anyhow, it was a bean tree. And he looked at it, and he looked up, and as far as he could see, he looked up, as far as he could see up there and up in the sky, and he could see the stars and everything, and he couldn't see the top of that tree. So he said to his mother, he says, Mother, well, I don't know what's going to happen. He says, but the man told me that these were magic beans. I'm going to go out, and I'm going to climb that tree, and I'm going to seek my fortune. So out he went, and he put a knapsack over his shoulder, tied it around his neck, and he got on that tree, and he started to climb. And he climbed, and he climbed, and he climbed, and pretty soon he got up so high, and he looked down, he couldn't even see the house anymore. Kept going up higher and higher and higher. Oh, monster. He carries a club over his shoulder that's as big as a telephone pole. And oh, he's just awful. He just is terrible. You don't want to get him. You better get away before he sees you, because if he catches you, that'll be the end of you. Jack said, oh, I'm so tired. He said, I've been climbing this tree all this time. He says, couldn't I just go ahead and rest a little while before I go home? Well, she was a soft-hearted old crone. And so she said, well, you come in and you lay down and you rest a while and I'll give you some food. And she said, and then you go back home again. So Jack went in And he sat down and he had some porridge and some oatmeal and like that to eat, and he lay down and he fell asleep. And when he fell asleep, he didn't know it, and she forgot to wake him up. But the old giant came home, and he came in the house. "Hey, woman!" She says, what do you want? What do you want, master?" He says, "I want some food." And she said, "Well, you sit down. I'll get your lunch for him." And so she started putting food out before him. You know what he ate for lunch?
What?
He ate 14 cows. 14 cows. And 146 loaves of bread, 19 gallons of milk, 102 dozen eggs, and he was still hungry. "You bring me more food, woman, before I take my rest." And she said, "Well, I'll get you some more, but haven't you had enough?" "Oh," I said, "I guess I've had enough for now, but before I go to sleep, bring me my prize goose. Bring me the goose that lays the golden eggs." So she went over to the side there and she opened up a container at the side and she brings this goose over. And she puts the goose into the giant's lap, and the giant sits there with the goose. And this is a magic goose. You go ahead and you put this goose on there and you pet its feathers, and you reach underneath and you tickle its tummy and plop, it drops a golden egg. So he sat there and he petted the goose. Plop, one golden egg. Plop, another golden egg. Plop, another golden egg. Holy smoke, plopping golden eggs all over the place. Jack saw that. He says, "Oh boy, would that ever be a good thing to go ahead and have?" So he saw where it was, and he saw where the old giant put it, and pretty soon the giant said, "Take my goose back now. I'm tired. I'm gonna rest for a while." And so he laid down, and then the old lady came over and she says, "You better hurry and get out of here," she says, "before he wakes up or he'll get you." So Jack says, "Okay, thank you so much." So he quick got up and he ran all the way back. And as he was running back, she said, "Now remember," she said, "don't make much noise, because he is a magic giant." He says, "I can see that, and that big timber he carries is a club." She says, "But not only that," she said, "he walks and he's got a pair of 7-league boots." Jack said, 7-league boots? What are those? "Oh," she said, "my goodness, where you'd go ahead and run for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, he just takes one big step, clop, just like that. He takes just a few steps. In fact, if you lived up here in Aurora, where Grandpa Harry and Grandma Vivian and Grandma Barbara and Grandpa Earl live, and you take one step, you would be all the way down to West Virginia where Heather lives. Just with one step, you would be down there. So you be careful. Don't wake him up, or he'll put those 7-league boots on, and he'll catch you." So Jack went ahead and he hurried on, and he got there to the edge. And in the meantime, he had picked up several of these golden eggs that goose had plopped on the thing there. The giant had put them away. He just let them lay there. So he took those golden eggs and he put them in his pocket. And he ran and he climbed all the way down the tree. And he says, "Mother, the most wonderful thing happened. I made my fortune." She said, "How did you make your fortune, Jack?" She said, "Industriously, did you make your fortune?" He says, "No, not industriously. I was lucky like most people are." But he says, "Look what I brought back." And he showed her these eggs, and she said, "Oh, those are golden eggs. That's fine, Jack." And so, they lived for the longest time. He sold one of the eggs, then he sold another one. But, in time, pretty soon the eggs were all gone. There they were back at the same position again. They had no money, and they had no more food to eat. And Jack says, "Well," he says, "I guess I got to go up and tap the till again." She says, "What do you mean?" He says, "I got to go back up there to that giant's castle, and I got to get some more golden eggs. I got to get that goose, and I'm going to tickle it on the stomach, and plop, out comes the golden eggs." He said, "I got to get some more of those eggs." And she said, "Well, Jack, you be very, very careful when you go up there." She said, "Because you know what a terrible man he is." So anyhow, Jack says, "Well, okay, I'm going to go back up." So up the tree he went, and he climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed, just like it was there before. Finally got up there. He got up there on the ground, and he went over to the castle, and he rapped on the door again. And the old woman opened the door. She says, "Oh, you come back?" She says, "You shouldn't come back. You shouldn't come back, because he's going to be back pretty soon now, and he is so mad because he knew that somebody had stolen those golden eggs." And Jack said, "Well, I'm just coming up," he says, "just to get a few more, just to help things out." And he says, "And again, I'm so tired." He says, Let me rest for a while." And she says, "Well, you lay down and rest." She said, "Now, I'll give you a couple more of those golden eggs." She said, "But you'd better be careful of that giant, because he's bad if he gets a hold of you." And so he fell asleep, and sure enough, the giant came home. And he hollered right away, "Where's my dinner?" And this time he ate 2 534 sheep, 17 pigs, 4 horses, 2 jackasses, an elephant's trunk, and 145 gallons of milk, and 72 dozen eggs. And just then, Jack started to wake up, and he made a noise. Darn. What's what I hear? Do I hear something? She said, oh, no, that's nothing. So he sat down, he was eating again. He was eating one of the pigs and had the bones, he was chewing on it like that. And Jack made a little move again. He said, fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones and I'll make my bread. Jack thought, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? And the giant sat there, and pretty soon his head began to nod again, back and forth, back and forth. And Jack thought, just as soon as he gets asleep, I'm going to get the heck out of here. Nodded his head. Pretty soon, almost asleep. Oh, he woke up. He said, woman, bring me my golden goose. I want to stroke my golden goose before I go to sleep. So she brings the goose over, and he strokes the goose's head and reaches under. Plop, down comes a golden egg. Plop, down comes another golden egg. And Jack's watching all the time because he's going to get some of those eggs. And Jack wasn't very careful where he was, and he pushed and he hit something, and something fell off the little table right by him. And the giant jumped up. Fee-fo-fi-fum! I told you I smelled the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones and I'll make my bread. And he sat there, and pretty soon he nodded back and forth, and he went to sleep. And Jack thought, here is my chance. I'm going to get out of here, and I'm never going to come back to this place again. So he went over, and he says, well, there's no use in me going ahead and taking these eggs down here. I'm going to take the darn goose itself, and I'll never have to worry again. And you know, from people from that point out, I'm always looking for a chance just to get the egg, or to get the goose instead of the egg. And so he went ahead and he took this goose and he put it into his knapsack and hung it around his back, and he started to run. And as he started to run, the goose that was in the bag said, quack, 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 master, master, they're stealing me. All of that woke up the giant. Whoa, that Englishman's around. He's got my goose. Where's my 7-league boots? I'm going to get him, and I'm going to grind his bones. I'm going to make it my bread, and I'm going to get my big pole over my shoulder. It's my big club. And Jack ran just as fast as he could go. He was running back across, and pretty soon out of the castle comes the giant with the big telephone pole over his shoulder and the 7-league boots on. One step in Aurora, one step in West Virginia, one step in Georgia, one step over there where Nancy lives over in Cincinnati. All over the place he was taking these big steps coming after Jack. And Jack ran and ran and ran as fast as he could. And just as the old giant was almost ready to catch him, Jack got at the top of the hill, and instead of climbing down, he put his arms around, and he just slid down that pole. And he had that goose in the back and that knapsack on his shoulder. And he slid down there, and he got to the bottom, and he ran in the house, and he got an axe, and he came out, chop, 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 chop. And he could hear the old giant coming down. Whoa, where's that Englishman? I'm going to get him. Down he started to come, and Jack took that chop, 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 chop. And pretty soon, he chopped that tree down, and the tree fell with a great big smash onto the ground. And that was the end of the giant. And Jack had the golden goose, and to this day, whenever they need money or anything else, they sit there and they pet the goose on its head, and they rub its stomach, and plop, out comes a golden egg. And that's the story of Jack and the Beanstalk.
He tells that different every time.
Well, you can't